Don't worry, Cities of Sigmar. I'll be back for you. Hello everybody, it's the Warhipster here, coming at you with another box and build review, sprue, deep dive, unboxing, whatever you want to call it, video for you today. Yes, we are back with another pile of miniatures. This pile, to be precise. Yes. It's a large pile. We've got the Neurolictor, the Hormagorns, the Biovore, the Lictor, we have the Gene Stealers, we have Deathleaper, and we have the biggest and best till last. We of course have the Norn Emissary. Oh my. Yes, Games Workshop have very kindly sent me this veritable pile of Xenos awesomeness to build up and paint for all of you. More on that later. But we're going to be doing what we normally do in these videos, which is have a good look at the sprues, find anywhere where it's possibly a point for you to look at and make sure you're just a bit careful when you're building yours, and tell you how long it took for me to build them, and then give you my final thoughts on, well, how I feel about them. Now, a quick spoiler alert for you, these are not Cities of Sigmar. So that should tell you everything you need to know. If you want to know even more, you should subscribe to the channel, because it's a great way to help me out for free. You should like this video, and you should leave a comment below, because it boosts the video. And that's what I need you guys to do. Boost me. So without further ado, because there's 7 boxes here to get through, we're going to jump in, and we're going to start taking a look at the new Tyranids. Okay, I feel like we should kick things off with the Norn Emissary. Here it is. All before you, everything that you get inside the box. So what do you get? You get yourself one instruction manual. You get yourself one 100mm round base. You get 3 sprues. Well, it's 2 sprues, but these ones are attached. So it's technically 3 half-size sprues. So not as many sprues as I thought you were going to get. But look at these components. Some of these are absolutely humongous, like that tail. Look at that. Goodness gracious me. Now within this kit, you will be able to build a Norn Emissary or a Norn Assimilator. So it's a multi-option kit, and I'm sure there are plenty of options here for kit bashing around for those of you out there who like to do such a thing. Now, the instruction manual doesn't feel too heavy, too hefty either. It's 1, 2, well, hang on. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 pages. And after that quick flick through the instructions, it's you either build out the entirety of the Norn Emissary or the entirety of the Norn Assimilator. So it's denoted by this one being blue, and the Assimilator will be in green. There we go, as you can see. So it's not like you build a body and then a couple of things change. Some of the components are probably exactly the same, but it's giving you this laid out in a kind of, this is how you build this, this is how you build that, which is really nice. It's not confusing at all. It does mean that you will have to, rather than just kind of pick out the instruction manual and just read it cover to cover, or just open it to page 1 and then, you know, but you know, that's just one of those things. You can't just be like, turn to page this. Anyway, there we go. So we have our entirety of each different type of model, and helpfully there are no weapon options within this as far as I know, so we don't have to know what things are called based on the data sheets. They just have their loadout, and there's no optional extras in there. It doesn't look like there's anything in terms of options in terms of how it goes together. However, it does look like it's easily sub-assembled into the top and the bottom there based on that large dome you can see there. So if there's a smooth piece, which I'm absolutely certain that there is, it'll be covered over, which is nice. But yeah, here it is, 12 and 11. As you can see, don't worry, that will be combed over. But you will have to be very careful with that peg to make sure you get it slotted in correctly. That'll be an interesting challenge when we get to it, we'll find out. But yeah, this doesn't feel particularly difficult at all looking at it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pages per beastie, which is really interesting. I would count up all the components, but I think we'll be here for a while. But we'll try it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36, 37, 38, 39, 40, 41, 42, 43. Roughly 43 components for the Norn Emissary, which is exactly what we're going to build, because I think it's the coolest one, and it's what the box is named after. So it's technically the box art. You know what we like to do around here, after all. So let's have a look at those sprues, shall we? Because there's a couple of components that I've spotted here just by having a casual look that might be problematic. So for example, these tiny little bits, but we don't know how big or how small they are in fact going to be. And this one right here, I can already tell is going to be a problem, because it's something that goes in on a flat surface. So it'll be really obvious. You can see the seam there in the picture. So that's one of the things we're going to have to watch out for. But we'll have a look at the sprue and we'll see what the haps is. So let's start off with a single sprue, actually, because that's a little less bewildering to look at. There we go. So here we have it. And on this sprue, we can see some very large components. See a leg there, for example. If we have a comparative Space Marine in terms of the size, here is the Khan. The leg is as tall as the Space Marine. So this is going to be a big, big boy. Oh, big lady. Who knows? So looking at this sprue then, how are the components laid out? So we have connection points on the smooth flesh of the tail here and here and here. So those are things to definitely watch out for, that you get a nice smooth cut and you smooth it down not too kind of vigorously, because it's right on the seam where the two bits of the tail will go together. It is on the underside, but you don't want to end up with that uneven look. When I show you what it looks like on my fingers, you end up with that kind of look on the components. So just watch out for gouging there if you're going to use a knife. Otherwise, use a mold line remover. We have very tiny little component here, which will be easy to miss, the little claw just there. But that's attached at the joint, which is really good. So you won't have any kind of really difficult kind of scraping and smoothing out. We have a connection point on the flat of the big claw here. So again, not particularly well positioned, but probably unavoidable. When it comes to this dome-like section, there's two here, so presumably one for the Emissary and one for the Annihilator, or Assimilator. I think it's the Assimilator. Questioning myself now. So that will just be one of those things to watch out for, and it probably changes the angle at which the model is kind of standing when it's glued in all together. So you probably could bash it if you want to for a unique-looking Emissary or the other one. Connection point here on the fingers, so in a slightly awkward place, and then we have a connection point here on the actual claw. So that's another thing to watch out for. The leg itself, we have it on the soft flesh here and here, but we have it on the underside of the hoof there, which is really good. But then we have it on the back side of the hoof, just there and on there, which means that can potentially be visible. So that's just another thing to watch out for. This is a somewhat kind of complicated sprue, I think, to look at all at once. We have a connection point here on this claw again and on here, and when you're building models like this, when they're as big and organic as they are, it's really easy to miss any kind of missed clip points, especially in the build. So do just be very careful as you're going around. Make sure you twirl the piece based on the orientation that it was in the sprue, but come at it like this, just so you make sure you get all of those connection points smoothed down and all of the mold lines removed. It's very easy to miss them on models such as these. Looking at the other sprue, then we have our double-sized, there it is, and we've got some very, very brittle barbed things here, and this one I believe definitely goes on the assimilator. And it's, again, we've got a connection point here on the smooth bit of the barb, but that's one of those things to watch out for when you're clipping, and make sure you do it in order. I would start here because that is the stress point. If you clip here, you run the risk of snapping it around about halfway. So just make sure you clip that bit out first, then these two, and the same goes on the other component right next to it. Clip the one that's on the, for lack of a better word, arrow, and then here towards the base where the component's a little bit sturdier. As for other tiny pieces, we do have a very small little face here, but that connection point is on the bit that will glue up, so easier to hide, which is good. We've got that really chunky looking base, which is really cool. I'm very much into this. We have connection points again on all of these claws. It is on the flat, smooth part of the claw, and it's going to be one of those things where the challenge is to make sure you don't gouge it or take too much off it when you're trying to smooth it down from your clipping off the sprue, because you want those to be nice and smooth. You don't want them to collect paint or anything like that by having it gouge or having like kind of little tiny little pinhole in it by kind of clipping too vigorously. We have the top part of the carapace here, and here, and the connection point is right on the front. So that is going to be so obvious if you don't catch that one. So do just make sure you bear that in mind when you're building yours. Otherwise, I think this is just about an acceptable sprue. There's a lot of kind of areas to be wary of when you're clipping and assembling and putting the whole thing together. This does slightly concern me in terms of the complexity of this for newer builders, but I think ultimately it's unavoidable on a kit like this. And the same thing goes for this one. It's that you just have to be very careful and make sure you orientate those components like this, and then you go around them to make sure that you get all of those mold lines and all of those clip points smoothed out. So do just bear that in mind as you're going around. But this is a remarkably 2D model on here, which is really impressive, which means there shouldn't be mold lines in any really kind of weird places. It should all be in the places that you expect based on the orientation of the component as you clip it out. But we won't know the answer to these questions until we start building it ourselves. So that is exactly what we're going to do now. So brace yourself. Let's see how long it takes. Here we have it, our Norn emissary is all built, and just to show you an idea of scale, this is the Screamer Killer from Leviathan, which I know many of you would have been building and painting over the last couple of weeks. And there you go. It's a big boy, or girl. It's very big. Clever girl. Right, so now that we've got that one done, we should probably move on to the next one, which is going to be Death Leaper. Here we are. Now, inside the box you get an instruction manual. You get a round base that is of a size. I'm not entirely certain what size it is. We will find out what size it is by looking in the instruction manual. 60mm round base. There we go. And you get this one sort of half-size sprue split into two, and you get another sprue. So there we go, a 3-spruer, just like the Norn emissary. So there's lots going on here, but there isn't any options in here, so it's not like a single Lictor kit builds the Death Leaper plus a bunch of other things, or instead of a bunch of other things. Death Leaper is as Death Leaper does. So having a little look at the instruction manual here, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pages of awesomeness. There we go. And it's all non-optional, so there's no kind of optional builds here. Death Leaper is as Death Leaper does, once again. So here we have it then. Lots and lots and lots of components here. Looking at the highest numbered one, it goes up to 43, so 43 components over 6 pages. There's not really too much to write home here about the instruction manual. I always like to check them just in case there are kind of optional heads or whatever. But really the magic of this moment is to look at the sprue. So we'll start at this one. Here we go. So here we got a bit of the scenery. We have a leg. We've got some of the cloak, I guess, for lack of a better word. Now this seems like a reasonably well laid out sprue as opposed to the Norn Emissary. We do have similar problems here with the little tiny claws, and these are really tiny claws in comparison to the Norn Emissary. Naturally they would be, but all of these are attached to the sprue on the outward facing areas. So those are the claws here, they're all kind of here on the knuckles, and some of them are even on the actual claw itself here and here. That's definitely something you have to watch out for 100%. We've also got the top of a kind of spike here as well, which looks like it does slot in, but there's a potential that that seam just there around that edge, so pull up the knife just to show you, just around here, that is one of those things that could show up if you don't really make sure it's nice and secure and glued in really thoroughly. The cloak itself appears to be attached to each other within the chitinous areas of it, within the kind of the body of the cloaky bit. Yes, as you can see here. So this one goes into the spine just there, as does this one. In fact, it looks like maybe we're in the clear. Shouldn't have any seams running right down the middle of the cloaky bit, as you can see. So it all seems to attach to either the tail or to each other's spines. So that is good, because there is always that possibility that you have to somehow negotiate a gap going right down the middle. The tail here has a connection point on the soft flesh of the actual tail itself, but actually, do you know what, looking at it, that will be fairly visible because it goes down between the legs at this angle. So you do just want to make sure you be careful when you're mold line removing and when you're smoothing that one down in terms of using your knife or your mold line remover. And what we do have here is we have a connection point on the actual carapace, the chitinous armor of the leg. So again, right at the joint, at the apex of the piece of armor, piece like that, we've got that connection point just here. So do just make sure you kind of scrape it at the angle that is appropriate to get it nice and smooth, so you don't have a nice triangle on sort of 4 or 5 of the segments, but then just like this flat dent on the last one, because that will be very noticeable, especially on a frontward facing leg. Otherwise, let's have a look at the other sprue, shall we? There's lots of these components appear to be part of the scenery upon which it stands, so pipes and things. So actually there doesn't seem to be too many components for Death Leaper. Obviously he has more than your average lictor, one would hope. We'll find out when I open the lictor box. Here we have a Mind Flayer head. Looks proper Baldur's Gate 3, that actually, looking at it. Ooh, shadows of Illithids. But we have similar feedback on this one, I would guess, for general Tyranids, and why change the habit of a lifetime. We do have a floating bit of plastic here to be mindful of, so just remember that it's there, because you can sometimes glue these things together and just forget that these types of things are here. They're not meant to be there. Clip it off, it doesn't need to be there. This claw and this claw and this claw and this claw, they're all on the outward facing kind of knuckles again of the claws. This one appears to be on the underside, but I'm guessing that's more of an outstretched one, so it's probably very visible, so do watch out for that. We have a connection point here on another claw, we have a connection point here on another claw, and we have a connection point here on more chitin and more claw here, and also on the soft flesh just there on that arm. Same thing going on this arm as well. So do just bear all of this in mind, that there are areas to absolutely watch out for and be very careful when you are smoothing them down. Again, we're trying to avoid gouging or flattening off a rounded detail too much by being too heavy with the knife. It is very important that you don't do that, just so that the model kind of looks as natural as it's supposed to be. That's why having a mold line remover is generally a good idea, especially for those slightly smaller areas that need to be smoothed. Otherwise, I'm pretty happy with this. It doesn't seem too complicated. Tiny claws are annoying. Sometimes they feel unnecessary, but I'm hoping that it can't have been avoided with this one. It's just always kind of quite fiddly to get them in. So when you're applying glue, don't apply too much. Just make sure you're putting a spot of glue in rather than filling up the joint, because it will splurge out and then it'll stick to your fingers. And it's just one of those things to watch out for, especially when there are so many of these. You will just have to manage that a little bit as you go through the model. And speaking of going through the model, that is exactly what we're going to do now. So we're going to hit that time lapse starting now. Just me, or is it genuinely impressive how big Death Leaper is now compared to the Screamer Killer? That's our reference point, I think, for this one. It's just, look at it, it's gorgeous. It's absolutely wonderful, this model. Whew. Ooh, creepy. Right, now that Death Leaper is done, we can move on to our next one, and we're sticking with lictors. We're going to be doing the Neurolictor. So what do you get in the box? Well, you get the Neurolictor, you get one sprue, and you get this 50mm base, I'm going to guess. Yes, 50mm base. Now what's interesting about this one is, of course, that it does come in a single box. I'm surprised by that. I thought it would be an option in the Lictor kit, but it is its own thing, which is really cool. So not too much to do here. I think, yes, as far as I can see, there are no options. So again, you will end up with an empty sprue. Yeah, no optional extras here, but 1, 2, 3, 4 pages of instructions, which is pretty cool. He's a nice little model, this one, and I'm looking forward to building it because I think it looks great. Yeah, not too much to write home about. We have got 15 components. So yeah, there you go. Simple as. Let's look at that sprue, shall we? Here it is. So, as we mentioned, we've got our 15 components here. We've got some really nice ones here. This body, for example, looks fantastic, just in a single piece. There is a potential piece of weakness right here in the middle, where if you're kind of too vigorous with the clippers, you might snap your Neurolictor in half. I doubt it, because it should be pretty sturdy, but it is that kind of joint that you do want to watch out for. Connected to the sprue, it is connected on a smooth top bead detail, which you will definitely see if you're not careful. And similarly here, this one actually will be connected to the, it's on the inside of a detail, so the head will go on that presumably, which will hide that, so you don't have to be 100% on that one. But again, as always, good practice to try and be nice and smooth. We've got a connection point here on the skin, but that is just veering in towards the joint. So again, this one, not 100% have to be perfect, but we do have an outward facing detail here that we do need to be perfect on. Well, not perfect, just very careful with. For the tail, and for this other tail, or I think it's the ovipositor type thing, the one on the back of the head, we do have connection points on the smooth flesh, again on outward facing details, so do just be very careful with those. On the head, we've got our connection points all on the outside, which is a little bit tricky, annoying. Same feedback here on the arms as we have done on the previous two. Same on this leg, same on this part of the tail slash body, same on this arm. This body looks pretty good, should be reasonably covered up and close to joints, if not actually on internal. Yeah, see, it's internal to the edge there, so that's really good to see. But yeah, I mean, it's quite efficient sprue. It's not as eye-watering to look at, and there aren't loads of tiny little claws. We do have one here in the shape of component 5, but otherwise... Oh, and we have another one here in the shape of component 6. See, they're tiny. I couldn't spot them all from this far up. It is one of those things just to watch out for when you're looking at these kinds of things, and just kind of planning out where they are. I know that I lost claws 2 or 3 times on the Norn Emissary and on the Death Leaper as well. Otherwise, like I said, this is a very efficient sprue, nice use of components to get something as detailed and as cool as this one is. And, well, we're going to build it up, and this one should be reasonably quick with just the 15. So, I shall see you back here in just a moment. With our Neurolictor all built, here we go, another size comparison just there next to the Screamer Killer, and you know, that's about the right size as I would expect. It's looking cool. So we're now going to move on to our next one. Yes, the kits don't stop. So the next one is going to be the Lictor. Yes. So what do we get in the box? Well, we get another 50mm round base, and we get one single double sprue here. And what's interesting about this one is there are variants within here. That's why we look at the instruction manual, and we've seen 2 of them. They're here on the back of the box, 1 and 2. So I'm going to be interested to see if there is indeed a third one. There is indeed a third one, 1, 2 and 3. And my goodness me, this one looks really cool. Oh, I'm very much into that one. Right, so let's have a look at the instructions, shall we? So blue, green and pink. So it's blue, 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 green, 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 pink, 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 pink. So much like we've seen in the Norn Emissary, you build the whole thing based on the variant that you want, which is really, really good. So if you want 3 lictors, because that's the maximum that you can have, then you'll have 3 very different, distinct looking lictors, which is really good. That's excellent. Great planning ahead there by Games Workshop. Rule of 3 dominating everything, of course. So yeah, I'm really impressed with that. I think that's awesome. I'm probably going to build this third one because that's the one we haven't seen, and I think it looks awesome, like proper violent. Yeah, you wouldn't want to be on the receiving end of that now, would you? Each one appears to be roughly 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3 pages each. So not too many components per one, one would hope. I would count them up, but in fact we can do that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36. So roughly 36 components in each. So this will be a little bit more kind of involved than maybe the Neurolictor was. Well, absolutely it will, because it's double the amount of components. But it's pretty cool. 3 variants in one box. That's a really nice touch. I like that. So we get just this one single sprue, as mentioned, divided into 2 kind of quarter-sized sprues. And, well, we'll just look at the whole thing. So here it is then. So there shouldn't be any surprises at this point. Based on all of the Tyranids that we've done across both the Leviathan box and this one, and indeed the Parasite of Mortrex, of course, that the feedback always remains the same, and there's always the things to watch out for are consistent with all of the Tyranids. So at least, while some of them might be slightly annoying, such as connection points on the segmented triangles of the armor, like this one here, and this one here, and this one here, and this one here, and probably more somewhere, at least you know what to watch out for, so you should be well practiced and versed at this point in building your Tyranids. However, looking directly at this sprue, the heads, for example, they've got a component here, and component here, are wildly inconsistent with how they're attached to the sprue. So we have our connection points here on the underside where it would be connected and hidden away, and we have it on the back end of the tentacle here on the front, but then we have on this one, we have a connection point right there on the end of one of the segments of the chitin, which is a slightly more tricky place to get to when you're trying to smooth it down. It's one of those things where it's quite easy to kind of take too much off and end up kind of merging the two segments together. Similarly here, we have our connection point on the outside of the tentacle here, or at least on the inside track, so that when you're trying to glue your two halves of the head together, that's one of those areas to watch out for, to make sure you get it nice and smooth, but don't gouge it too much, because then you'll have a weird gap on the front of your lictor's face, so, and you definitely don't want that. We have a bit of a body here, just here and here, and again connection points right on the top of those armor pieces, and the same thing as with this head piece here, this is right on the edge here of this segment of the chitin. So again, if you're too vigorous with your knife, you may end up merging the two plates together, which you don't want to happen. We have a couple of really tiny little components here again, 1, 2, 3, 4, in terms of the little claws and things, so there's things to watch out for, but these are attached at the joint, apart from this one, which is on the knuckle. So 3 out of 4 ain't bad, slowly getting better. But then we have another thing here on the actual knuckle of the claws here, not here, which is good, but we do have it on the flat of the claw here, and on the flat of the claw there, and on the flat of the claw there. So these are all just kind of areas of annoyance. We have it on the knuckle here, and we have it on the flat of the claw as well. So yeah, just all, it's just a similar thing over and over again with these kits. There's nothing really surprising here, but it is always good to point out the things that could be potentially minefields. We have stuff that is on the flat of the flesh of the tail here, connection point just there, and we have it here on the spine as well. And then on these kind of the arms, we have this connection point going on the flat, softer part of the outside of the arm. So just there, so there's the kind of inner sort of weird sort of fleshy thing, which the claws presumably snap down onto, but we have it there on the smooth of the flesh. And again, we have another connection point right next to at the end of a segment, so do be very careful just here. The arms, it's always connected here on the forearm. It's rare when it's not, and again, just smooth flesh, so do be careful when you're smoothing it down. Otherwise, like I say, there's not really any surprises here within this kit, but there's a lot of really cool details, and one of the things I think is fascinating about this is nothing is particularly standing out to me as why we get 3 different variants in there, which is very subtle way of making the sprues. It's not like completely wildly different heads and things like that. So you will have to be very careful making sure you get the right components in the right order for the right lictor that you want to do. But there's no reason why it shouldn't be fairly customizable with 3 different variants. You should be able to use different angles of arms and things like that just to get it looking exactly how you want. Theoretically, that should be the case. So this is a really cool little sprue. I'm really excited to see how this one goes together, because it's not leaping out to me as to how different it's going to be. So I guess what we should do then is we should jump in and start building it. So with that done, our lictor is now built. As you can see, it's looking pretty cool. This would be a fun matchup now, wouldn't it? It actually comes in a little bit bigger than the Neurolictor, which surprises me. I mean, it doesn't look it, but it has that kind of slightly greater surface area with the large claws, which is cool. I like it. I like it. We're on a roll here, and what we're going to do is we're going to roll on to the next one, which is going to be the Biovore / Pyrovore. So this is a double kit where you can build one of two different options. So what you get inside is you get the instructions for the Biovore / Pyrovore, and it doesn't look like it on the front, it just says Biovore, but Biovore and Pyrovore are both options here. You also get, as it says here, one 80mm base and three 25mm round bases, because what you can build out of here is the spore mines, mucilid spores. I'm going to find out in just a second. Spore mines, there we go. And what you also get, the most important part of course, is 1 and 2 sprues. So technically 3, because they're these little quarter-sized sprues. And there's not tons of components here. I am surprised by it, but some of them are quite meaty, and it should be a reasonably sized miniature here, which is really exciting, because, you know, more slightly bigger bugs is always a good thing. So, having a quick look at the instructions, shall we? As we already had that quick flick through, as you can see, Biovore, Pyrovore. Biovore, in fact, actually, and this is a really good point to prove here, is that within these, this model kit, you build one section first. So that is built, and then you use it to either construct the Biovore or the Pyrovore, whichever one you wish to do. And then of course you've got some very simple spore mines there. 3 of them, 3 of the best. Isn't that lovely? So we should probably jump in and have a look at the sprues, shouldn't we? That's the thing we should do, as we've been doing all of this time. So we'll start here, where we have the majority of our spore mines components appear to be situated. So we have 1, 2, and 3, and then 1, 2, and I don't think the third one is here in terms of the head. Doesn't look like it. It's probably on one of the other sprues. Yes, it is. So, looking at this one initially, we've got some really kind of lovely, kind of smooth, fleshy bits here on the Pyrovore and the Biovore. And judging by holding it, actually, the gun isn't actually that big. It's not much bigger than, not even as big as my little finger. About the same size as my thumb. So that gives us a reasonable indication as to what the size of the miniature is going to be. It is on an 80mm round base, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be a really hefty boy. We'll find out very shortly. Now, as for the spore mines, we do have some connection points on the softness of the tentacles here, 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 and here. And then we also have one on the softness of the brain here, right on the join, same here. That's actually on the chitin around it, and we also have it here on the softness of the brain bit, or the kind of explosive that's in the middle of it. So those are just areas to really watch out for, because those are going to be circular, so they look like a dome like that, and the two halves go together. So make sure that you don't gouge it when you're trying to make it nice and smooth, so you get that nice smooth connection on the globe, the globular nature of it, so you don't have that sort of inconsistent dipping like that at the seam, because you don't want that. Of course you don't. These large legs, I'm assuming they're legs, they look like legs to me. They've got connection points again at the apex of the armor here and on the claws. So all 3 of these are in the worst possible places for it to be. We do have one right here in the joint, which is good, because that's nice and easy to hide and smooth down. This one we have in a slightly tricky place right underneath the chitin and on the smooth knee. So those are always ones where, trying to come at it from the bottom, you might chop the top tip of the armor off, and if you come at it from the top, you can sometimes gouge it too heavily, so just be very careful here. And again, this one, as mentioned, is at the apex of the armor on both these places, so that is something to bear in mind. For the gun, it is appearing, to me at least, the gun is split right down the middle, so that is a point of possible gappage. So you may want to either have lots of glue here or have some green stuff on standby to make sure that that goes together nicely. Should be okay, one would hope, but you never know with these things. Otherwise, the connection points are pretty much on the hard kind of spiny bits here, 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 and here. And we have it here as well. And we have one here on the underside. It shouldn't be too visible. I think that's the underside at least. I'm pretty certain it is. Where you won't necessarily see that, but you do just want to watch out for it, unless it's that way around. I can't tell. I'm not entirely sure. Anyway, the same thing goes for over here. So we have it on the hard bits here, 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 and here, and here. Checking out our other sprue then. Here we go. So we have a different gun here. This one is the Biovores weapon by the looks of things. Yes. Or it's at the very least the kind of barrel of it, and would lead me to believe that that one's the Pyrovores gun. We have our connection points again on the legs at the tips of the kind of the apex of the armor here, 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 and here. We have kind of contact points here on hard chitin armor, but right on the join. So again, no gouging. We have some really cool components though, like this lovely large kind of scorpion-like back, which is really cool. And then the connection points for this are all around the outside on bits that are quite easy to smooth down. Similarly for here and similarly for here, we have the same sort of thing going on. The gun feedback is probably the same as the other one. This one's a little bit harder than the other one, kind of more solid details rather than kind of larger fleshy sacks, which is really cool. The inside bit here, this kind of would be, I guess, around about a tail area. We have a connection point there on the soft part, which would go probably with this bit here. Possibly. We shall find out when we build it in just a moment. This is, however, a very efficient sprue looking at it, especially with this one as well. To build something like this, I thought it would be a little bit bigger and a lot more detailed in terms of the amount of points and components that we would require to build it, but there aren't loads of tiny little claws like we've had on the Lictors and Death Leaper and Neurolictor and indeed the Norn Emissary. These are all kind of nicely sized components, so it should be a reasonably fun time out for everybody involved. I'm probably going to build a Pyrovore because I think they're cool, and I think those flesh sacks with the veins on them look really, really interesting. I would like to paint one. So I'm going to build a Biovore, I think. But yeah, otherwise, I should probably get my building stuff. With our Pyrovore all built up, it's looking pretty cool. Like I said, it's not as big as I thought it would be on an 80mm round base, but it's still got a bit of heft to it. It'll look nice next to some barb gaunts in amongst all of that kind of good stuff. So what we're going to do now is move on to what is arguably our main event, which is of course the Gene Stealers. I mean, they're not really the main event, but you know. Here we have the instruction manual for our Gene Stealers, and it comes with a bag of 32mm bases, 10 of them to be precise, and we get 1, 2, and 3 whole sprues of Gene Stealery goodness. These are the brand new ones, and they look absolutely fantastic. And I've been longing for some new Gene Stealers, because one of the first videos we did here on the channel was some Gene Stealers, and it's nice to return to these things every once in a while, especially with the brand new version. So we get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 pages of instructions, and well, as you can see there, these are absolutely gorgeous. They're not all kind of leaping and leaning forward. They're on an appropriate size base, so these should probably stand up on your battlefields a little bit better than they perhaps did in the olden days, and they're very, very cool. The only thing I think we're going to have to worry about a little bit is, you know, with the kind of new plastics and the amount of detail and the kind of dynamism in these models, is that on models like this one and this one and perhaps this one as well, is we'll have to be very careful about making sure that we hold them attached to the base with the glue a little bit longer than we perhaps would normally, because all of the weight will be towards the front of them and they might have a tendency to just fall forwards when you're not looking. So that is something we're going to have to watch out for. Otherwise, looking at them, this first Gene Stealer here is consistent of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 components. So that's really, really cool to get this much detail and dynamism out of them from roughly 9 components each. I would guess it's probably about the same for each. Now, I think one of the things to point out in here is that we do have tentacle faces. Is it Yumgal Gene Stealers? I think that's the proper name. We do have that as an option for every single one, should you wish to do that, which is really neat. I like that a lot. It's not just like 1 or 2. You can do all 10 of them with tentacle faces, which is great. Love it. Right, let's have a look at these sprues, shall we? Now, I'm not anticipating anything particularly shocking here. These should be all completely different. It's not going to be two kind of identical 5-man sprues, because these are 3 sprues rather than 4 or just 2 sprues. So each one should have unique details within it, and by the looks of things it does. We have one sprue over here which appears to have all of the arms, which is really cool. We have one here that appears to have most of the heads and the bodies. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So we've got all the bodies there. And then this one appears to have all of the legs, which is, I can't tell you how satisfying that is as somebody who builds a lot of these types of kits. To see it like laid out like that, that's really, really cool. That is awesome. I like that. I mean, there's a couple of things here and there that kind of move over onto other sprues. So for example, over here we have 2 heads, but otherwise that is all arms. Yep, I can't see anything else on there that isn't arms. So all arms and 2 heads. We have bodies and heads here. Yeah, bit of basing stuff on there. And then we've got a couple of arms on here, but mostly legs. And a couple of heads as well. This is great. I like that a lot. So that makes it quite easy, because, you know, we've done 5 of these kits now on this video. We've done all the Leviathan stuff. So really, when looking at the sprue, the feedback is the same as it has been across all of the rest of them. We have connection points on the soft bits here. Gene Stealers are generally quite soft. We have them not so much actually in the joints, rather than they are just on the musculature of the bugs. Same on the arms. We have connection points on the talons, which can be really tricky with models of this size. When it's slightly bigger, it's easier to smooth it down, whereas on smaller arms and hands, it can be a little bit, it's much more noticeable if you do kind of take too much off it with a knife. So for these things, I really do recommend using a mold line remover if you have one. Otherwise, just be very careful with your knife blades. The bodies, similarly, again, we have connection points on the hard kind of spines up here, but we do also have it on the soft bits of the bodies as well. It's just one thing to watch out for as and when you are building your models. The heads, one thing to look at here is that we have on the kind of the non-tentacle faces, we have a connection point in the neck and under the chin, which means it's pretty easy to hide. We don't have it on the top of the brain part of the head. And on the tentacle ones, as far as I can tell, we do tend to have one connection point on the tentacle on the front, but then again, it's in the joint and at the back, which is really good. Just check it on this one as well. Yeah, nothing on the actual kind of smooth surface of the head, which is really good. I like that a lot. I'm into that. And then lastly, we have this sprue, of course, and the same thing for these two tentacle faces. We have it on the front of the tentacle, but we don't have it on the top of the head, which is really good. It's really, really encouraging. But these are arms, and the same thing applies as was on the arms on those first couple of sprues. Just watch out for those talons and things, because you really don't want to gouge them out, because it will be really noticeable with the Gene Stealers. Otherwise, this is really cool. I love that they have divided the sprues up like this, and it should make for really efficient building. We'll spend a lot less time kind of hunting for components, which is great. And you can see just how it's been printed out, literally like that, by the looks of things. So just bosh, bosh, bosh. That's really intelligent, and I like it a lot. So we're going to jump in and we're going to start building them. We'll build one, and then you'll know how long it takes to build the entire unit. So our Gene Stealers are all built. Here's one. And for scale, rather than using the Screamer Killer, what we're going to do is I'm going to show you this with a Space Marine. As you can see, it's a nice size now. Very nice size. Scary size, in fact. And these are pretty fun to put together. They do have a mold line going all the way up the middle of their bodies, and that is one of those things you do just have to watch out for. But they're really dynamic. They're really cool. It's a really nice glow up for the Gene Stealers. Yes, lovely stuff. Right, what we're going to do now is we're going to move on to our final kit, which is of course going to be the all new, all improved Hormagaunts. So what do you get in the box? Well, you get yourself a bag of 25mm bases, 28mm bases, as you can see. You get one 40mm base, because naturally within this kit there is a Ripper Swarm, just like with the Termagants available in Leviathan. So 10 of the bugs and then one base of the smaller bugs. So having one of these plus your Leviathan ones gives you a full unit of Ripper Swarms, but it does also give you more stuff that you can perhaps bring to the battlefield in the event of having a Parasite of Mortrex, which is really, really nice. So there we go, there's our Hormagaunts. And we also get 2 sprues, just the 2 here, of plastic. So it's not a particularly complex kit because there's a lot of bits here, but Hormagaunts aren't a particularly complex little bug. Not say like the new Termagants, for example, with all those extra weapons. No, we have just the Hormagaunts, and they have pretty much the only things that they have available to them are as you see on the sprue before you. So let's have a quick look inside the instruction manual. We have ourselves a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pages. It's fairly consistent. And as you can see, some of these are, well, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 components. They're mostly 6 components each. So they should be an absolute doddle to put together, which would put us in the region of having somewhere in the region of 62, 65 sort of components, including the Ripper Swarm inside the whole kit. We've got a couple of optional heads here that we can use, for example, but there's no like kind of alternate posing or whatever, because, well, you don't really need it for something like Hormagaunts. They'll be in a massive swarm anyway, and any kind of similar ones. For example, this one, he looks fairly dynamic and fairly interesting, but he'll be in and amongst the swarm with the rest of them. So, presumably all of the arms, much like with the Gene Stealers, I thought this as I was going through, the arms will be kind of transferable between the claw arms, so you will be able to get some interesting combinations out of these. And we do again have more extra heads here, more kind of optional heads just there. And there you go. It's a really simple little construction manual. It's very, very light. Very, very nice. 6 components each. That's lovely. So, having a quick look at the sprues then, as mentioned, we have our 2 sprues. And it's 2 unique sprues, which is great. It's not 2 of the exact same sprue, so it's not kind of 2 batches of 5, because that wouldn't make sense for the Ripper Swarm anyway, because you only get the 1 in here. So, let's look at these one by one. So looking at this sprue first of all, we have got exactly the same things. So it's really just kind of a case of just finishing things off strong here with this kind of sprue review. What we do have as a really nice plus is that the Hormagaunts heads here, they're all attached at the neck, which is fabulous. I really love to see that. And we don't have a ton of connection points on some of these bodies, well, these legs. So for example, we've just got the 1 there, and we've got 1 there. The rest seem to be on the underside, where it's going to glue into the base, which is really cool. I expected this to happen, but pretty much all of these claws have got a connection point on the smooth top. So that's one of the most obvious details of a Hormagaunt, because as you look down at them, you will see the tops of them. So do just be very careful when you're smoothing those out, because you don't want to obviously gouge them too much, as we often say here on the channel. Now on the actual kind of bodies here with the tails, we do have our connection points on the soft flesh of the tail under here. So that is one thing to watch out for. Again, make sure you just come at it at a nice angle. Don't go kind of straight flat, because it's got a soft edge around the tail, as you can see on the underside here. And if you just kind of go straight at it and dig too hard with a knife, you'll have that flat thing, which you won't necessarily see from looking down from up top. But as soon as you kind of look at them from the side, you will be able to see a missing chunk on the back there. That is something to watch out for. We have a connection point on the top of the chitinous armor here, but it is roughly in the middle. So the only kind of tricky part here is getting your clipper in between the segment and the bit you need to clip. So it might be that you just clip it at the top towards here. And then when you remove the flash using a knife or a mold line remover, just very carefully get in there and cut away from the segment rather than into it, because you can end up chipping off the tip of the one at the top. That is one thing to point out there. But I really like the fact that those heads are attached at the neck. Shall we see if we continue? We've got 2 more here. They are also attached at the neck. It's very nice. And let's have a look here, shall we? So, yep, head, 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 head. Yep, they are all attached at the neck. So, big thumbs up there. We don't have to worry about cutting away or kind of clipping off awkward to get to flash on the tops of their heads, which is really, really nice to see. Otherwise, claws again attached at the actual claw, so again watch out there. And bodies, we have connection points on the underside on the flat soft belly. But it's a fairly consistent sprue. Like I said, it's not identical. These are unique components, and all of these are unique components as far as I can tell, but they are not identical sprues. So there will be a bit of sprue hunting. Unfortunately, it's not bodies and heads and then legs and arms on the other. This time it is all a mishmash, unlike the Gene Stealers. Gene Stealers are my favourite kit I've ever built so far, just in terms of the layout of the sprue. But it's now time to put the layout of the sprue to test, and what we're going to do is we're going to build one of the Termagants up, starting right now. Oh boy, it's a lot of stuff, right? 25 models in 7 boxes, which is, you know, a fairly good chunk. Overall, it took me about a day's work to put all of this together. It's quite detailed stuff, and there's a lot of components to work through. So it took me a little bit longer than I perhaps first anticipated or perhaps wanted, but it's pretty cool. Now, the big question I think on everybody's mind is, did I get it all painted in time? No, because they're not Cities of Sigmar. However, I did manage to get this painted. Yes, the Norn Emissary is done. Look at it. It's enormous. Enormous Emissary. He's fully finished, and I absolutely just had to get this one done first because, well, you know, it's cool. I have done Death Leaper as well. I'm just waiting for his base to dry, as you can see, but there is never enough time in the day. Once that base is done, Death Leaper will be ready as well, and then it's time to move on to the rest of the Tyranids. Have no fear though, my friends. Just because the Norn Emissary and Death Leaper are the only ones that are finished right now, that does not mean I will not do the rest of it. The rest of it is coming very soon. However, there's more Cities of Sigmar to do. Now, I bet you're wondering why I keep mentioning Cities of Sigmar, and there is a reason. The Cities of Sigmar came out a week ago, and everybody should have just received their boxes or are imminently about to receive their boxes, and then the Tyranids have come this weekend after. And one of these two things I was a lot more excited for. You guessed it, Cities of Sigmar. However, we're not here to talk about them, we're here to talk about Tyranids. It's just, for me, it feels like a drop in excitement levels. I know it was unrealistic to expect the rest of the Cities of Sigmar range to drop the week after, but, you know, a boy can dream. So what do I think about these Tyranids kits? Well, first and foremost, I'm going to talk about the Gene Stealers, because that kit was phenomenal. I really, really like having the components divided out the way they did them. You know, the legs, the arms, the bodies. I think that's a really, really cool way to pack your kits like this, especially with something like Tyranids, the way that they are. They're all tentacly and spiky and horrible. So being able to group those components together like that was a really efficient way of getting through the box. I knew which sprue to go to at which time, which made for a really genuinely enjoyable building experience. However, when it comes to things like the Norn Emissary, the Lictors, not the Neurolictor, but the Lictors and Death Leaper, I thought we were drowning under components a little bit, especially with the amount of tiny little claws. It's just a little bit too much. Quite a complex next step on from something like Leviathan or a starter set for Warhammer 40,000. It just felt like a greater leap than it necessarily needed to be. Having that many tiny little components is always going to mark something down for me because it's more time spent building than I would necessarily like. However, on those kits, the mold lines were fairly non-existent, which was rather impressive, as opposed to the Gene Stealers where there was always a thick one right down the middle of the body, and the same goes for the Hormagaunts. Speaking of the Hormagaunts, that was a very efficient sprue. There wasn't too much wasted components in there, and by wasted components, for me, that means too many optional extras, because I'm not going to use all of them, and it just ends up being a sprue that I end up having to clip the bits off of late off to keep them to one side, which is fine, I guess, but as I'm not going to be building tons and tons of Hormagaunts for a Tyranid collection, I'm really glad that there wasn't too much in the way of wastage, for me. So the Hormagaunts and Gene Stealers kits are really, really nice. The Lictors are a little bit complex for my liking. It's not that I couldn't do them, of course. I did do them, and obviously you've seen me build them. But it's just that step on, because Tyranids have become a starter army. Much like in the previous edition, Necrons were a starter army, and the Space Marines were the other starter army. The Necrons were also quite complex to build. The joints in the arms, for example, were sometimes quite tricky to actually get into places. And the next steps on for the Necrons, for example, were things like Zarek, the Silent King. Would you expect these things to be just that infinitely more complex than a Space Marine? But they are then followed up by having to level up your hobby just that little bit more than perhaps if you were doing the Space Marine half of the box. So, is that a good thing? Only time will tell. I don't know. But what do these models look like? They look phenomenal. They look great when they're in amongst the rest of the new Tyranids. I don't have any old Tyranids, so I can't compare them in terms of detail and contrasting and things like that. But I'm starting to think that the new Termagants will not really work with the old Termagants because there's so much more extra ridging on the carapace. The legs and arms are all so much more segmented and connected that it's starting to feel a little bit more like this is a really nice range and there's stuff missing from it. I think for long-term Tyranids collectors, it's not a problem. But for newer Tyranids collections, adding this stuff and then buying the extra stuff in and around it that hasn't had a re-release or an updated model, so for example, most of the big monsters, it might be a noticeable drop-off in quality of design. I don't know for sure because I haven't got any of it myself to look at it, face on. But only time, I guess, will tell on that front. The biggest problem I had overall with all of these was the biovore. Making sure that it was straight and not falling down to one side was actually quite tricky to do, especially when building on a reasonably tight schedule. So for those of you who take your time, then it should be fine. But for me, I think I user errored it and rushed it a little bit, and so nothing was properly dry, particularly with those legs when I came to build it. And so I ended up having to add a little bit more glue after a while and add a little kind of block underneath the body just to ensure that it stayed upright, because mine had drifted right forwards and was leaning on the ground. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it didn't look right to my eye and I didn't like it, so I ended up having to reposition it and just hold it for a little while longer. It's a point to point out for people out there who are maybe building quicker than I am or similarly to me, but for those of you who take your time with such things, it shouldn't be a problem. So overall, it sounds like I'm being quite down on them, and I think this is where I'm going to have to detach myself a little bit, because Tyranids are not something that I really like. It's never a faction that's really attracted me. It's not something that I've ever pictured myself having, because they're just the evil space monsters from outer space, and that's not something that appeals to me. But I think overall, finishing off this new range of Tyranids with this lot is a really, really good step. And I think as an army, as a horde, as a swarm, it does look fantastic. I have to concede that there's just something more about these newer ones that I wish would be translated to things like the Haruspecs and the Exocrine, which are both lovely models in their own right. It's just that there's something about the carapace that's just that little bit different that I think will make it stand out in comparison to, say, a Norn Emissary, which is an absolutely breathtaking centerpiece to have for any army. Should be lucky to have it. So ranking these on the Land Raider scale is pretty difficult, because I have my thoughts on them in terms of the experience of building them and putting them together, if you're coming at it from a new person's perspective, or indeed if you're coming at it from a veteran hobbyist perspective. I think we have to aggregate it here as a little bit of a score, and well, I think because of what has been redesigned in terms of really ancient Gene Stealers, Termagants going back, Hormagaunts, the Lictors, Death Leaper, all of it is getting its really nice glow up. I think we're going to go for a solid 7.5 out of 10, because as I've already mentioned, whilst Tyranids have never really been it for me, they've never been a faction that I've really liked, I can see myself liking these more and more as I get to know them and I get to hobby with them. So yeah, I think a 7.5. 7.5 out of 10 feels like an appropriate score for me. So yeah, 7.5. Because the complexity of them is challenging, but on the other side it's a little too challenging, because I always approach building as if I'm a new person, because I am a new person every time with every kit, but I also don't like building, so the experience has to be really top notch for me to do it, or I have to absolutely love the model that I'm building. So the Gene Stealers, absolutely 10 out of 10. The rest of it in terms of its complexity, excluding the Hormagaunts, that's fair, the tiny little claws and things on the Neurolictor, the Lictor, the Death Leaper, the Norn Emissary, that balancing problem of the Biovore / Pyrovore, yeah, I feel like brings just the general score down. But 7.5 out of 10, still positive, because I think it's really great. So there you have it, guys. I hope you enjoyed this one, and I hope you found it useful. And please do argue with me in the comments. Tell me why Tyranids are the best faction in the world, because I'd love to love them as much as some of you guys do out there. I really would. Anyway, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all very soon in the next one. If you enjoyed this video and you'd like to support me a little bit further, you absolutely can do. Head over to patreon.com/Warhipster, just like all of these wonderful, amazing people have done. And you can also become a YouTube channel member, just like this incredible bunch of folks scrolling up on the screen before you. There's a hell of a lot of you, and well, I can't do this without you. YouTube and Patreon, you guys absolutely keep the lights on and make all of this worth it. Thank you so much to all of you for everything you do. And if you really like this video and you just want to shoot me a little thanks, you can click on the thanks button just below this video. Don't forget to share it, like it, comment on it, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. And to make sure you stay up to date, don't forget to click the bell icon. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all very soon in the next one. Happy wargaming.